One of the reasons people don't get as many marks as they hope to is that rather than focusing specifically on what the mark scheme requires, they tend instead to just write what they think is a good essay or what their teacher thinks is a good essay, rather than doing exactly what is required. So if we have a look at the mark scheme, we can see what gets marks and therefore what you have to focus on. AO1 is about using everything you say to focus on the question and answer it very directly. Let's have a look at the tips from the exam board about how to do this. Every question is a platform for you to show that you are able to fully meet the assessment objectives. The image of a platform is interesting. So the question is there to help you show off what you can do. Everything that you write needs to do that. Therefore, demonstrating that you know the meaning and messages conveyed in any text is vital. We'll see messages used often, and if you don't know what the main message of each of your set poems is, or your set novel, or your set play, then that's something that's worth thinking about very carefully. Before you can do that, you need to ensure that you select 6 to 7 relevant quotations, which contain a range of language and or structure devices that you can comment upon in your paragraphs and help you to answer the question. Note that 6 to 7 quotations is probably slightly fewer than many people tend to use. There are some answers which will get a U or only slightly better, which might have no quotations or just 1 or 2 quotations. If you have that few, you can't show off sufficient attention to detail or cover the whole passage from beginning, middle to end. But the other extreme is having, let's say, 20 quotations. If you try that many, then there's no way you can talk about each of them in enough detail to show off your reading skills. So remember, 6 to 7 quotations is all you really need, and this is coming from the exam board themselves, to get full marks. Spread them out across the whole extract, so perhaps 2 to 3 from the beginning, 2 to 3 from the middle, 2 to 3 from the end. A high-level response will incorporate these quotations into the explanations of meaning and context to give a very precise and specific response. Meaning and context there are both important, so you need to think about what the denotation of the quotations is, and that is what you'd find if you look them up in a dictionary, so the literal meaning of them, and then also think about the context they're being used in, because that will give you some insight into the connotations of the words. These are the implied or suggested meanings. If you imagine every word as being like a little cell where you've got the nucleus, which is the denotation, and then around it you've got some of the connotations. Get both. So pinpoint exactly what it means, and then think about how it connects to other words in the extract. What are some of its implied or suggested or associated meanings? Like rose, for example, means or denotes a species of flower, but it connotes love, romance, and beauty. Finally, very precise and specific means that if what you are saying about the quotation doesn't directly answer the question, then it's probably not going to be getting you many marks. Moving on to AO2 and AO3, this is really giving you some tips about how to analyse the language that you've selected. It is important that you try your best to maintain a response that has explanations and analyses that is supported with reasons. Do not just state your ideas. If you have gone to the trouble of choosing your top 6 to 7 quotations, let's call them, so it's easy to remember, the Super 6 or Super 7. If you've gone to the trouble of making that shortlist, then you should have good reasons why each quotation has made it onto your list. Probably more than just one reason per quotation. So try to aim at more like 2 to 3 reasons per quotation. Now join up the dots for the examiner. Don't make them do the work for you. That makes their lives difficult, and therefore you are less likely to get marks. Instead, explain exactly why you've chosen the quotations you have done. Remember, they're like ammo for you to shoot at the mark scheme so you can get marks. Use the words because, as, or since to offer your reasons as to how the writer's use of language and structure devices achieve the particular effects that you mention. So there, because, as, and since are being given to you, recommended to you as words you should be using to help you get marks. So I think it would be a good idea to start doing that if you aren't already doing so. Be sure to link your ideas to the question. That can actually be very easy. So let's say the question is about how the writer makes the poem significant. Well, what you would need to do then after each quotation would be, quote, is significant, then because, as, since. So link to the question and then use because, as, and since. Your individuality and insight are determined by how well you have studied the poems and understood the themes and messages. Look how their messages is coming in again. This gives you a clue to how important they think it is. For AO1, we had that it's vital to demonstrate that you know the messages conveyed, and now AO2, show you understand the messages. It is how you explain and analyse the writer's use of language and structured devices in relation to the question. You can tell they are irritated when people drift away from the question because they're hammering home here that you must focus on it. One very simple mnemonic that I like to use to help people meet what is required for AO2 and AO3 is on the right of the exam board's tips there, basic. So keep it basic. Choose your quotations, then use because, as, since. Talk about the impact on you. What message is being communicated? What difference to your life does it make that you have read this poem? And then C, connect to the question. Because, as, since, impact, connect. Basic. AO4 is where people get a bit confused sometimes about what a personal response means. You can see here that they think it actually just means that it's not plagiarized. So it's your response, not someone else's. You haven't copied it from your teacher or from Spark Notes or anything like that. So instead, you've got to be giving your reasons for having chosen these quotations, making sure you're continually answering the question. It's probably worthwhile just once or twice in the essay to use the first person pronoun, so I think or I feel, especially because many of the questions actually say, how does the writer make it vivid for you? You wouldn't need to do this all the time. I think that would get irritating, but I would connect it to saying what the main message or meaning is, perhaps at the end of your essay and at the beginning. So phrases like, I think the main message is, give your reason, and then use because, as, since can be a very effective way to conclude. Here are some more tips, again from the exam board, that are all there for you to read in the learner's guide that I will put a link to in the description for this video. But amazingly, many people don't read it and many teachers don't read it either. If you do read it, then it gives you some shortcuts to getting the marks you want. These are some of the ones I think are most important. They don't come in this order in the guide. I've just changed the order to suit which ones I think matter most. Number 1 is the selection of quotations. Don't try to comment on every word. You must prioritize what quotations you need to spend your time on. You don't have long to write these answers, so you really must spend your time wisely. Choose your Super 6 or Super 7. If you're a quick writer, you can go for a top 10 and really make the quotations work for you. Choose the best ones. Think about how they appeal to your 5 senses, and also look for words that are rich in connotations, so what they might suggest or imply and how they connect to each other. Remember, a really good piece of writing is like a spider's web, so when you analyze one quotation, it's like picking at one thread on a spider's web and the rest of it will vibrate as well. The best answers are attentive and attuned to those vibrations across the web of the poem. The final stanza of a poem is crucial, as this is where the poet emphasizes his attitude. What this means is that you should be spending quite a big chunk of your essay on the end of a poem, and it is also a shortcut to finding out what the attitude or message is. Remember, it's a good idea in your introduction, as we'll see in a moment, to pinpoint and sum up what the attitude or message is. So you can skim to the end, find out what it is, choose a quotation, and then use it in your introduction to summarize the meaning or attitude. Mark different sections of the poem by drawing a line across the page, and consider how the writer uses structure to communicate his ideas. Are there any turning points? These sections will not necessarily be the same as stanzas. Not enough people do this. It's a good idea just to find the beginning, middle, and end section of a poem that you are analysing, and you don't have to follow the stanzas. So look for words like but, and, yet, or similar words which signal a change in direction. And if you are doing this, you are thinking about how the poem is structured. You don't need to have anything particularly flashy for structure. Instead, just look at how the ideas develop chronologically. How are they introduced? How are they developed? And then what are the concluding thoughts? Is there a change in perspective? In an introduction, summarize the meaning of the poem and the poet's attitude in no more than 3 to 4 lines. End by stating the focus of the essay question. So your intro should always say what the main or overall meaning of the poem is, what the poet's attitude is, and it shouldn't go over 3 to 4 lines. Most people spend far too long on the introduction. Don't make that mistake. By using time connectives, then, after that, next, you are retelling events. By using connectives that help you link your ideas and analyze, however, furthermore, as a result, consequently, you are answering the question. So here, we should not be paraphrasing what the poem says. The examiner already knows that. Instead, you need to be making sure that your ideas link together. So if you are currently using words like then, after that, and next, get into the habit of using words like however, furthermore, as a result, and consequently, instead. Read each of the paragraphs you have written before writing the next. I bet hardly anybody does that. People tend to check at the end of writing an essay and read the whole thing. So the tip here, and remember this comes from the exam board, not from me, is to read each of the paragraphs you have written before writing the next. This means that you are continually focusing on making sure that you're answering the exact question you've been asked. That's helpful because the question is a platform for you to show off what you can do. Check that ideas are clearly stated and that each paragraph answers the essay question. By ideas being clearly stated, you should be using words that help you link your quotation choices to the wording of the question. So remember, because, as, and since will help you clearly state your reasons for having chosen your quotations in your shortlist. And then also using the word of the question, significant, vivid, moving, tense, at least once in every paragraph, will show that you're always referring back to it. A conclusion should summarize your personal response to the task and text. It does not need to repeat points you have already made. The type of conclusion then, where people say, so as we can see, the poet makes the poem vivid through metaphor, imagery, or descriptive word choices, is awful. You'd be much better off saying that, overall, I think the main way in which the poem is made significant is quote a particular detail or phrase that sums up the mood or atmosphere or message, and then explain why that one embodies your personal response. So a quotation should be built around, a conclusion should be built around a particular quotation that you think is most significant. You must show an awareness of the poet's intended meanings and messages, attitudes. There's that word messages again and attitudes again. So start getting to the habit of using phrases like the poet's message is, the poet's attitude is, and you can talk about shifts in attitudes as well. I hope this is helpful. If you liked this, then look forward to more of it coming soon.